It was a warm Sunday morning in Nashville, Tennessee, the kind of morning where the sunlight filtered in gently through the dusty blinds of Melody Morning Cafe, casting golden shadows over mismatched coffee mugs and faded wooden tables. The cafe wasn't fancy, it had seen better days, but it had a charm that made people linger. In one corner stood an old upright piano with chipped keys and a crack in the varnish that ran like a scar down its side. The walls were covered with handwritten lyrics, faded photographs, and autographed napkins, mementos of music and memories long past. Thomas Caldwell pushed open the door quietly, one hand on the shoulder of his 9-year-old son Liam. The bell above the entrance gave a gentle jingle, causing Liam to flinch slightly and tuck himself closer to his father's side. Thomas gave him a reassuring squeeze. He scanned the cafe quickly, always alert to how Liam might react. The boy had changed so much in the past year, ever since the accident that stole his words. Once a curious, chatty little boy, Liam now only repeated a few sounds or words, often nonsensical, and loud noises made him shut down completely. Thomas was a man known in the music industry as a titan. At 60, he still wore tailored suits and carried himself like someone used to boardrooms and concert halls. He had built a recording empire from scratch. But none of that meant anything now. Not when he couldn't reach his son. Not when the house echoed with silence since his wife passed. Grief had muted more than just their lives. It had stolen the music from his heart. They took a seat near the window, where Liam could watch the world without being too close to anyone. Thomas ordered pancakes for his son and black coffee for himself. He barely noticed the waitress until she spoke. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said, crouching to Liam's eye level with a warm, practiced smile. "I like your shoes. Blue's a good color." April Jensen had been working at Melody Morning Cafe for nearly 2 years. At 37, she was a single mother doing her best to raise her little girl. She had once sung in smoky bars, her voice raw with soul, but motherhood and a bout of postpartum depression had pulled her off the stage and into the quieter rhythm of serving tables. Still, music lived in her. Sometimes, when the cafe was quiet, she'd hum under her breath, or tap out melodies on the counter with a spoon. Liam didn't respond, but he stared at her, more precisely, at her voice. Then he turned toward the piano in the corner, his lips moving ever so slightly. Thomas noticed, and his heart thudded. Liam hadn't reacted to anyone's voice in months, not even his therapist's. A few minutes later, while delivering another table's coffee, April heard it. A tiny voice, barely more than a whisper, coming from Liam's table. "Son home." She looked over, puzzled, then slowly began to sing under her breath. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her voice was soft, tender, just enough to float through the space between them. Liam's eyes widened. He mouthed the words silently. Thomas froze, watching in disbelief as his son leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the table in rhythm. In that one fragile moment, something cracked open in the air around them. Something raw, something real. A flicker of hope, of healing, of a connection rekindled not by therapy or medication, but by a melody. Thomas looked up at April, his eyes misted with something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. He didn't say a word. But he knew, this woman had just done something no doctor could. Thomas had never been to Melody Morning Cafe before. It wasn't the kind of place a billionaire usually stepped into. But the child psychologist had urged him, expose Liam to new environments. Places with gentle sounds, warm energy. Somewhere that doesn't feel like therapy. So here they were, father and son, sitting in the quiet corner of a cafe that smelled like maple syrup and cinnamon, surrounded by strangers who paid them no mind. Liam sat still, unusually calm, his eyes fixated on the piano across the room. An older man had just sat down and was playing a few soft chords. Simple, almost hesitant. But it caught Liam's attention in a way Thomas hadn't seen in months. The boy leaned forward, not too close, just watching. April noticed it right away. She had just refilled a coffee cup when she saw the child mouthing something to himself, 2 words, over and over. Son. Home. Barely audible, but rhythmic, like a memory trying to find its way back. She froze for a moment, heart tugged by instinct more than logic. Then, without even realizing what she was doing, she began to hum gently. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her voice was soft, low, almost a whisper. Liam's head turned slowly toward her. His lips parted, then moved, shaping the next few words in silence. Thomas stood still, his breath caught in his throat, watching it happen, his son, responding to music. Not just hearing it. Feeling it. He clenched his fist under the table. Not out of anger but awe. Something was happening. Something real. April didn't think much of it at first. Just another quiet Sunday shift. Just another moment that stirred something in her chest and then passed like a breeze. She didn't expect to see the man again. But the next morning, tucked inside the tip jar was a folded note, neatly written on fine stationery, the kind no one used unless they had money and manners from another era. "My son hasn't sung along to anyone since my wife passed. I don't know what happened yesterday, but I know it was real. T. Coldwell." She read it twice. Then a third time. Her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't just the words, it was the weight behind them. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just grateful. He was reaching for something. Later that afternoon, a black car pulled up outside the cafe. It wasn't flashy, just quiet and sleek, like someone who didn't need to announce himself. Thomas Caldwell stepped out, still in a tailored gray suit, his expression serious but no longer guarded. He walked up to April, standing near the counter, and spoke in a tone that was more vulnerable than she expected. "I don't want to waste your time," he said. "But I was wondering if you'd consider coming by the house, to sing with Liam. Not professionally. Not as a therapist. Just sing. Like you did yesterday." April stared at him, unsure. Her voice hadn't been part of her life in years. Not since the panic attacks. Not since the sleepless nights with a colicky baby and no one to call. She wasn't a singer anymore. Just a mom. Just a waitress. "I'm not trained," she said softly. "I'm not licensed. I don't know anything about helping kids like him." Thomas nodded. "Neither do I." There was a silence. A long one. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt honest. "I'm not asking for technique," he added. "Just heart." Those last two words stayed with her the whole night. The next day, she found herself standing at the gate of an estate that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The Caldwell residence was vast but not cold, elegant, with long windows and ivy that wrapped around stone columns like a song around a melody. Liam was already waiting in a room that looked more like a small music studio than a child's playroom. Instruments lined the walls. But he was sitting on the floor with a tiny drum and a straw in his hand, tapping it gently on a cushion. April sat beside him, unsure how to begin. So she just hummed the same tune. "You are my sunshine." Tap. 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 Liam smiled, barely, but it was there. A flicker. A spark. For the next hour, they didn't talk. They didn't need to. She sang, and he tapped along. Sometimes he echoed the last word she sang, just barely audible. Sometimes he didn't. But the rhythm was building, between them, beneath them, through them. Thomas watched from the hallway. He didn't interrupt. He didn't film it. He just stood there, listening. For the first time in months, he felt something other than defeat. He didn't know what this was. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't structure or control. It was music. And somehow, it was enough. April had always believed music was something you gave away. Not something you kept. It was a gift you offered up to strangers in the dark, hoping it might make them feel less alone, even if you still were. But after her daughter was born, the stage lights became too bright. The applause too loud. The silence afterward too deep. There was one night years ago that still haunted her. She had booked a late-night set at a local lounge, trying to reclaim something of herself after the fog of postpartum depression. But halfway through the second song, her voice cracked, then vanished entirely. Her hands trembled. Her heart raced. Her breath shortened. She could barely see through the tears. No one booed. No one clapped. They just watched as she stepped off stage and never came back. That's why, when Thomas Caldwell asked her to come sing for his son, something inside her recoiled. "I can't," she had whispered that first day. "I'm not who I used to be." But then, there was Liam. Not speaking. Not looking at her. Just sitting there, gently tapping a plastic straw against the edge of the table while she sang. At first, she thought it was just fidgeting. A child's way of blocking out sound. But the rhythm matched her voice. Tap, 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 tap. He was listening. She changed the tune, just slightly. Slowed it down. Added a little swing. His tapping shifted with it. April stopped singing midline, pretending to reach for her water. Liam looked up, then tapped twice, soft then sharp, as if asking her, "Why'd you stop?" April blinked. Something cracked open in her chest, something fragile and buried. This wasn't a stage. There was no spotlight, no crowd. Just one little boy who wanted to hear her finish a song. That night, April stood in her kitchen after putting her daughter to bed. She pulled out an old shoebox filled with wrinkled lyrics, demo tapes, and a pair of earrings she used to wear on stage. She hadn't looked at it in years. She held one of the papers up to the light. It was her handwriting, young and bold. At the top, a title she barely remembered, "When Hearts Don't Speak, Music Does." She smiled sadly. Then reached for her guitar. The next morning, she showed up at the Caldwell estate, guitar in hand, a little shaky but standing tall. "I won't promise anything," she said to Thomas at the door. "But I'll try." That day, she sat cross-legged on the floor beside Liam again. This time she didn't just hum, she sang a lullaby her mother used to sing to her. And Liam, without being prompted, tapped his straw in perfect rhythm, then mumbled the last word of the final line. It wasn't clear. It wasn't even loud. But it was real. Thomas stood in the doorway again, hand on the frame, head slightly bowed. There were tears in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. Because in that moment, in that room full of half-healed people, the music was doing what nothing else could. It was helping them all find their voices again. April didn't start with ballads or jazz. She knew better than that. This wasn't about vocal range or artistry, it was about connection. So she sat with Liam on the soft rug of the Caldwell music room and began with the simplest songs she could think of. Childhood songs. The ones everyone knows but no one remembers learning. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. She sang slowly, one word at a time, watching his eyes, his hands, the tilt of his head. Liam didn't sing back. Not yet. But his fingers started tapping again. This time, it wasn't just a random beat. He was feeling the rhythm. Following it. After the second line, she paused. Liam looked at her, and then softly, almost like an echo, he whispered, "Star." Just one word. But it was enough to make April freeze. She smiled and kept going, repeating the line, then waiting. Again, he responded with the last word. Quietly, but on beat. By the end of the song, he had said 5 words total. All were final words of each line. All were imperfect, but they came from him. Thomas watched from the hallway. He hadn't planned to. He told himself he'd give them space. But hearing Liam speak, really speak, even in fragments, drew him like a magnet. He didn't say anything. Didn't want to disturb the delicate balance. But his heart was pounding. Over the next few days, April returned every afternoon after her cafe shift. She always brought a small bag with her, a couple of laminated song sheets, a toy xylophone, a small tambourine. She sat on the floor each time, at Liam's level, and treated each session like a conversation, not a performance. Liam, for his part, began to anticipate her. He would sit by the window around the same time each day, straw in hand, tapping out some indecipherable beat on the glass. When her car pulled into the driveway, he didn't smile, but he turned toward the door before she even knocked. 1 week in, something shifted. April was halfway through the alphabet song when Liam suddenly reached for the toy piano beside him. It was old plastic and missing a key. But he pressed down 3 notes, C, E, G, one after the other, slowly and with purpose. Then he did it again. April stopped singing. "Liam, did you just play a chord?" He looked up, not answering, but repeated it again, C, E, G, tap. 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 April glanced toward the doorway, and Thomas was already there, his eyes wide. "That's a C major," she whispered. Thomas stepped into the room slowly. "He's never touched that piano." Liam played it one more time, C, E, G, and then softly said, "Son." April covered her mouth with both hands. He was associating sounds. Creating music. Not just repeating, but initiating. She turned to Thomas, whose jaw was clenched, not out of anger but from the pressure of holding in all the emotion swelling behind his eyes. "He's starting to speak, through song," April said. Thomas knelt beside his son, not saying a word. Just listening. Because in that moment, there was no need for speeches or applause. Just 3 simple notes, and a miracle unfolding, one sound at a time. By the second week, Thomas found himself sitting in on every session. At first, he stayed in the hallway, leaning against the doorframe with a coffee he never sipped, just listening. But eventually, he moved a little closer, settling into the armchair in the corner of the room, quiet as a shadow. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched and listened as April sang, and Liam responded in his own quiet, rhythmic way. There was something sacred about the space they created, like the rest of the world had to hold its breath when music filled the room. One afternoon, as golden light spilled through the window and painted the walls with warmth, April was halfway through a lullaby. Her voice, soft and steady, slowed as she reached the final line. She paused, unsure whether to end the song or keep going. Liam looked up, his lips parting. Then, in the faintest whisper, but unmistakably clear, he said, "Sing more." Thomas froze. April turned to him, eyes wide. "Did he?" she whispered. Liam, focused, repeated it, this time with just a little more strength. "Hot teep," Thomas muttered under his breath in disbelief. "He's asking you to keep singing." That was the first full phrase Liam had said, clearly and deliberately, in over 10 months. April blinked back tears. She didn't ask him to repeat it. She didn't want to break the moment. Instead, she smiled and picked up right where she left off, her voice shaking just slightly with emotion. Later that evening, Thomas called Liam's speech therapist, who had been overseeing his care for the past year. He told her what happened, the words, the piano, the musical engagement. The woman on the other end of the line was silent for a long moment before responding with professional caution. "I'm happy Liam is responding to music," she said. "But singing isn't considered a clinically proven method for speech development. It's not structured. It doesn't follow therapeutic protocol." Thomas stared out the window, jaw tight. "But it's working," he said. "Emotionally, perhaps," she replied. "But language acquisition requires consistency and reinforcement, not just feeling." After the call ended, Thomas sat alone in the music room. The quiet felt heavier now, like doubt had crept into a space that had once been filled with something purer. Was he chasing hope? Or abandoning science? He remembered all the months Liam had sat in sterile rooms filled with laminated flashcards and frustrated therapists. All the sessions where nothing happened, where his son had withdrawn further into himself. And now, in just 2 weeks, with a woman who sang lullabies instead of running drills, Liam had spoken. But what if the experts were right? What if this was all just coincidence, emotion clouding judgment? April found him still sitting there when she returned from the kitchen with tea. "You okay?" she asked gently. Thomas looked up, eyes weary. "They said this isn't real therapy." April didn't respond right away. She set the cup down, then sat on the floor beside him, just like she did with Liam. "Maybe not," she said. "But when your son asked me to keep singing, it felt real enough." He nodded slowly, the weight of decision pressing down on his chest. He wasn't a man used to uncertainty. But for the first time in a long time, he realized something. Sometimes, the heart knows more than the handbook. And maybe, just maybe, that was the kind of therapy Liam needed most. It started with a headline. Music mogul hires former bar singer to teach his son to speak again. The article wasn't from a major outlet, just a local entertainment blog that liked to stir the pot now and then. But it spread fast. Screenshots popped up on forums, Facebook shares climbed by the hour, and before long, it was being talked about on morning radio shows and whispered about in high-end cafes. Thomas Caldwell saw the headline during a board meeting. One of his assistants had discreetly slid a tablet in front of him. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened with each word. The piece included a blurry photo, clearly taken from a phone, of April walking into his home, guitar slung over her shoulder, a shy smile on her face. The caption was snide, "Healing or hustling." There were no direct quotes. No one had spoken to him. But the article pieced together just enough facts to feel invasive, and just enough speculation to feel cruel. When Thomas got home that evening, Liam was humming softly in the music room, tapping a spoon against his knee in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. April sat beside him, guiding him through a simple call-and-response melody. He stood there for a moment, watching them, watching her. The way she leaned in just a bit when Liam whispered, the patience in her hands, the softness in her voice. But the headline echoed in his mind like a bad chord, former bar singer, trying to get back in the spotlight. He cleared his throat. April looked up and smiled, unaware. "Hey, we just..." "Did you talk to the press?" he interrupted. The warmth dropped from her face instantly. "What?" "That article. Online. Someone took a photo of you. It's being shared everywhere." Her eyebrows pulled together. "I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't even know there was an article." Thomas didn't respond. He looked down at Liam, who was now silent, sensing the tension. Then back at April. "You didn't tell anyone? Not even friends?" Her voice was calm but hurt. "No. Why would I? This isn't a gig. This is your son." Thomas didn't answer. He just gave a tight nod, stepped back from the room, and said, "I think we should pause this for now." April stood slowly. "You think I'm using him," she said, not as a question but a realization. Thomas didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He simply turned and walked away. April remained standing for a moment, the silence pressing down like a storm cloud. Then, without another word, she picked up her guitar case and walked out of the Caldwell home. She didn't cry, not until she got home. And even then, only after her daughter had gone to bed. That night, she took out a blank piece of sheet music and began sketching the melody Liam had been tapping that afternoon. Underneath the notes, she scribbled a single line in pencil. "If I never sing again, I hope your boy still hears me." She folded the page, slipped it into an envelope, and mailed it to the Caldwell address the next morning. No return address. No explanation. Just music, and a goodbye wrapped in silence. Thomas didn't say much when he made the call. His voice was clipped, formal, like he was negotiating a contract rather than ending something delicate and human. "Thank you for your time," he said flatly. "We'll be moving in a different direction." April didn't argue. She didn't ask why. She didn't beg for clarification. The pain in his voice was loud enough, even in its coldness. "All right," she replied softly. That was it. No heated words. No explanations. Just silence where music had once lived. She didn't return to the Caldwell home the next day, or the next. She didn't sing in the cafe. She didn't hum while folding her daughter's laundry. For the first time in weeks, April went quiet. But not before leaving something behind. It wasn't much. Just a folded piece of staff paper. Handwritten, smudged in one corner from where her daughter's juice cup had tipped over earlier that morning. The lines weren't perfectly even. The treble clef leaned slightly to the left. But the notes were clear, 3 simple chords, a gentle progression that anyone could follow. At the top of the page, in soft cursive, she had written, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Beneath the familiar lyrics, in her own hand, she added a new line, a farewell stitched with melody. "If I never sing again, I hope your boy still hears me." She sealed the page in a plain white envelope, wrote for Liam on the front, and dropped it into the Caldwell mailbox just before sunrise. No note. No signature. Just a trace of the voice she'd once lent so freely to a boy who had barely spoken. Thomas found the envelope that afternoon. He recognized the handwriting immediately. His first instinct was to set it aside, to avoid the ache he knew was inside. But something in him, perhaps guilt, perhaps longing, made him sit down at the piano in the study, open the envelope carefully, and lay the page in front of him. He stared at the notes for a long time before pressing a single key. Then another. And another. The melody rose, uncertain at first, like a memory coming back into focus. As he played, he thought about Liam, how his son had responded not to therapy, not to structure, but to April's voice. To the way she didn't demand anything from him. To the way she waited for him to meet her, at his own pace, in his own rhythm. Thomas stopped playing. He pressed his hands against the keys, letting the final note fade into silence. In all his years in the music business, he had built empires from sound. He discovered voices that sold millions. But this fragile connection between a broken boy and a woman who had once forgotten how to sing, this was something else entirely. It wasn't about fame, or technique, or results. It was about heart. And somehow, he just walked away from the only thing that had brought music back into his son's life. Back into his life. He looked down at the final lyric April had written. "I hope your boy still hears me." And for the first time since letting her go, Thomas wasn't sure that he had made the right choice. It wasn't April who shared the story. It was a customer, a woman in her 70s, visiting Nashville with her sister. She had been sitting in the corner booth at Melody Morning Cafe the morning it all happened. She wasn't trying to go viral. She didn't even use social media much. But something about what she saw that day, the waitress singing softly to a child who had barely spoken, the boy mouthing the words like they were sacred, had stayed with her. So she posted about it. Just a short paragraph. No names. No photos. Only her memory of a quiet moment, full of more emotion than any concert she'd ever attended. This little boy, maybe 8 or 9, was sitting with his father. He looked scared of everything, even the sound of silverware. But then the waitress started singing "You Are My Sunshine," and I swear to you, that child looked straight at her and started moving his lips. I had to hold back tears. It was the most beautiful thing I've seen in years. I don't know who they were, but I'll never forget it. The post spread quietly at first, shared among older readers, parents of children with disabilities, retired music teachers. Then someone recognized the boy from the background of a photo, someone who did know who he was, Liam Caldwell, the son of Thomas Caldwell, the music mogul. When Thomas read the post, he froze. There were no accusations. No details that breached privacy. No mention of April at all. And yet, the entire scandal had been built on the assumption that she had gone public. His heart sank. He stood in the middle of his study, the folded sheet music still on the piano, April's final words still etched in his mind. He had been wrong. Not just about the article. About her. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his mind racing. He hadn't seen Liam much that day. The boy had been quiet again, withdrawn. When Thomas opened the door to his son's room, he didn't expect what he saw. Liam stood in front of the mirror, his favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, whispering to his reflection. Son. Home, son, home. Thomas knelt slowly, careful not to startle him. Hey buddy, he said gently. What are you doing? Liam looked up, eyes soft but focused. He hesitated, then whispered, singing. Thomas swallowed hard. You miss your songs? Liam nodded. Then came the words Thomas never thought he'd hear, not in that voice, not with that clarity. I want to sing, with Miss April. The room fell silent. Thomas blinked, his throat tightening. His son's voice, quiet, halting, but real, hung in the air like a prayer answered. He didn't know what to say. So he just pulled Liam into his arms and held him, the way he hadn't done in weeks. That night, Thomas sat by the piano again, staring at the sheet music April had left behind. He traced the words with his finger, line by line. If I never sing again, I hope your boy still hears me. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. Tomorrow, he would go back to the cafe. But this time, not as a businessman. As a father ready to admit his mistake. And ready to ask for something he hadn't asked in a long time. Forgiveness. The bell above the cafe door jingled as Thomas stepped inside, the familiar scent of fresh biscuits and maple syrup wrapping around him like a memory. It had been weeks since he'd last stood here. But everything looked exactly the same, sunlight spilling across scratched tabletops, the old piano resting quietly in the corner, and voices murmuring over morning coffee. Everything, except him. He didn't come with bodyguards or a chauffeur this time. He wore no tailored suit, just a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, humility in every step. No one noticed him at first, and for the first time in years, he preferred it that way. April was behind the counter, wiping down a tray. She looked up and froze when she saw him. Their eyes locked across the room. Thomas walked slowly toward her, not with the certainty of a billionaire, but with the vulnerability of a father. Miss April, he began, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. I was hoping you'd be willing to talk. She didn't answer right away. She just set the tray down gently and waited. Thomas took a breath. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the truth. April crossed her arms, guarded but listening. I built my entire life around music, he said. Studios, contracts, artists. I thought I understood it, what it meant, what it was worth. But somewhere along the way, I forgot where music really starts. He paused, then looked her square in the eyes. It starts in the heart. And what you did for Liam wasn't just music. It was healing. April's lips parted, just slightly. She said nothing, but her eyes shimmered. I know I hurt you, Thomas continued. I let fear and pride cloud my judgment. But Liam, he asked for you. By name. He wants to sing again. With you. April blinked slowly, the wall around her cracking, just a little. So I'm not here as a record executive, or as someone who thinks they have all the answers. I'm just a father, asking if you'd be willing to come back. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, April spoke, softly, but firmly. On one condition, she said. Thomas nodded. Anything. We don't do it your way or my way. We do it his way. That afternoon, April walked back into the Caldwell home. Liam was waiting by the window, just like before. When he saw her, his face lit up, not with a big grin, but with a gentle kind of recognition that said, I remember you. I trust you. Within weeks, the three of them had started something no one saw coming, Voices of Sunshine. It wasn't a clinic. It wasn't a formal program stamped with professional credentials. It was a safe space, filled with music, rhythm, laughter, and the kind of patience that didn't come with a clock. Children who had long been silent began to tap, hum, whisper. Some sang. Some just listened. But all of them connected. And at the center of it all were a billionaire father, a waitress who once gave up on her voice, and a little boy who reminded them both why music matters. Not for the charts. Not for the fame. But for the hearts it reaches, when words no longer can. The auditorium was modest. Just rows of folding chairs and strings of warm fairy lights that April had helped hang earlier that morning. The stage wasn't high or polished. It was built from donated risers and old theater curtains. But to the parents, teachers, and volunteers filling the seats, it looked like Carnegie Hall. It was the first public showcase for Voices of Sunshine, a celebration, not a recital. There would be no judges, no scores, no rules. Just music, made by children who had once been told they may never speak. Thomas sat in the front row, his hands clenched in his lap, eyes fixed on the stage. He wore no suit today, just a soft blue sweater Liam had picked out. It was wrinkled, and Thomas didn't care. April stood to the side of the stage, giving Liam a small, encouraging nod. And then, the boy stepped forward. 9 years old, a little too small for his age, but standing tall in that moment. He gripped the microphone with both hands. The room went still. The piano started softly behind him. 3 notes, just like they used to play on the floor together. Liam closed his eyes for a second. Then opened them and looked right at his dad. And then, in a voice thin but steady, came the words, "You make me happy, when skies are gray." The room held its breath. Thomas's heart shattered and reformed all at once. His hands went to his mouth, then to his eyes. The tears came, fast and hot, but he didn't hide them. He stood up and walked to the edge of the stage as Liam finished the verse, his voice growing stronger with each word, not because of volume, but because of belief. April stepped back, letting them have the moment. When Liam stopped singing, there was no applause, not right away. Just silence, thick with something sacred. Thomas reached up and pulled his son into an embrace, holding him close as if anchoring himself to that exact second in time. "I'm proud of you," he whispered, voice cracking. "I'm so proud of you." The crowd finally applauded, rising to their feet, not for a polished performance, but for the courage it took to get there. Later that evening, as the chairs were being folded and the lights dimmed, a woman from the local newspaper approached April. "What would you say this program is really about?" she asked, holding a notepad. April looked over at Liam, now sitting cross-legged on the stage, tapping a soft rhythm on his shoes. She smiled gently and said, "It's not about hitting the right notes. It's about giving these kids the space to be heard, even if all they have is one note." She paused. Music doesn't need a perfect voice. It just needs someone willing to listen. If you believe that one simple song can heal a soul, leave a like on this video. And if you want to hear more stories filled with kindness, humanity, and heartfelt emotion, don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We'll see you in the next story.